2 weeks ago, I stood up here and I just let everyone know that a couple of the schools that we support and are regularly involved with, Ruth Hill Elementary School and Smoky Road Middle School, reached out and said, hey, we are in need of some extra mentors. That we've got some students that we have identified as being candidates for one-on-one mentors, and we don't have enough mentors. And we're the foundation is the single largest provider of mentors in the public school system for at-risk kids in Coweta County. And so we were their first call, and they said, we're 21 short. And so we took the 21, and I just mentioned it 2 weeks ago and said it would be great if we could eat into that. And I just wanted to give you an update. We had 35 individuals that signed up, said, hey, I'll go mentor. That's great. Yeah, that was great. It was incredible. You might be asking, like, okay, well, that's more than 21, so what are the extra people going to do? So the 21 students that were already identified of saying, hey, they would be candidates for mentorship, for sure, that's not going to be all the need this year. It's just already as the school had gotten started, like these were like, hey, like lights going off saying, hey, they need someone to come and be a part of a mentorship world for them. And so, as I mentioned, the school system is not as maybe efficient or quick as we sometimes have the ability to do. We're just a little more nimble, and from a church standpoint, and we could have done training that day and your background check that day and taking your picture and put it on a card and all that kind of thing. It takes a little longer. So 22 of the 35 folks that signed up have already scheduled their training. Everyone else, though, as that gets placed, the nature of low-income schools is they're very transient. And so there are students that are going to attend these schools that have yet to move here. And what's going to happen is a lot of times rent will come due in one place and they'll move because they couldn't quite they'll find a cheaper place for rent. And they will move into the neighborhood and then they'll be at this new school. And automatically they'll walk in, and because history will travel with some of these students, and then they'll be candidates for mentors. So everyone, I would say in the next 90 days, everyone that signed up will have a mentee that qualifies in terms of severe academic behavior or attendance policy issue that flags them for not having a very good chance of graduating if that series of behavior continues. All of them will be assigned a student in the next 90 days. I promise you. That's just always the way that it goes. So thank you so much for doing that. I also want to just say thank you for doing it, because as we've seen in the last week, the need for positive role models and investment in children that are at risk was at the forefront of our news this past week. We saw it at Appalachia High School and what took place. And I just want to remind you, as followers of Jesus, for those of you who have decided to give your life to Jesus that are in the room, when things don't go well in our world, when things are tragic and there's crisis, our response is to get closer to it, not to distance ourselves from it. And when I think through the role that an adult that's consistent in a student's life that's at risk could make, it makes me start to think about that kid and what was missing. And I wonder if he had been in this community, he probably would have had a mentor. And he would have had somebody that ate lunch with him, regardless of his home circumstances, every day for the last 7 years. And that would have made a huge difference. And I think what we can do as a church, sometimes we never see the full impact because we change paths and we alter realities for students because of our investment, even though it's just so small. It's just lunch once a week, but it's a consistent lunch once a week. We were back in schools this past week with Ruth Hill. Some of the other schools started earlier, and so it was my first week back in mentoring, and I go on Thursdays, and I mentor a little kid named Ace. He's in 3rd grade. It's my 3rd year with him, and I saw him go in the lunch line. He didn't see me. And you just never know. Like, are they going to be excited when they get older? You know, are they going to be excited to still see you? They're like, man, I really wanted to have lunch with my friends today, kind of thing. So you just never know your first day back, you know? And so I saw him go in one lunch line. You go in one door and you come back out the other. And so I went to the place where he comes out, and I was just like posted up, leaning up, thinking like, okay, can I handle the rejection that could be coming? If he turns around and is like, I don't want to see you. And so I was like, just like hanging out there, and he got his little tray, and it was Walking Taco Day, which is the most disgusting lunch to watch someone who doesn't do messes well do. It's so nasty. But it was that day, and so he turns around, and his whole tray, he was like, oh, and I was like, oh, this is a good thing. And he was like, I missed you. And I was like, yeah, that's right. All right, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. We had a conversation. Yeah, you can clap. That's good. I loved our conversation. I asked him, I said, what did you do this summer? We saw each other at July 4th. He happened to be at the fireworks at the high school, and so we saw each other and hung out a little bit. But I haven't seen him since then, and so has nothing to do with my message at all. I'm just telling you stories. But I loved it because I sat there with him. I said, hey, tell me what you did this summer. And he said, because I've shared with him, like I'll show him pictures of places that I've gone and those kind of things, and I'll tell him stories about my kids, all those things. And so we'll always like share those. And so I asked him, I said, where'd you go? And he said, I went to a place you've never been. And I was like, yeah? Tell me. He's like, you're never going to guess. And I was like, never, And he was like, we went to Florida. And I was like, let's go. What did you do in Florida? He went, we went to the beach. And I was like, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. He went fishing. It was good. So we had a good time Thursday. So for those of you who signed up to Mentor, thanks. Thank you for doing that. It really does make a difference. All the weeks are not like this past week. I've had many lunches with Ace where, much less talkative, in trouble, doesn't want to see or talk to any adult. But days like Thursday make it worth it. So thank you. Okay, reset. We're going to do our teaching now. 1100 BC, 1100 years before Jesus shows up. Let me give you a setting. The people of God have inhabited what the Bible refers to as the promised land. It was a land that God said, hey, I'm going to give you this land. It started with a guy named Abraham. It was the very beginning of the people of God. And he identifies this family. It's a small family. It's not a huge family. And he makes some huge promises. And he's like, hey, eventually there's just going to be this land. Well, fast forward, the people of God have grown into a nation. This is many generations. People of God have grown into this huge nation, and they now occupy this promised land, and it's going great. They've got a king. His name is Saul. Saul's doing okay. He started really strong. He's kind of in a season where he's not doing so great anymore, but he's still in charge. He's still leading the people of God. And there's this particular group of people out of Philistia, which is a coastal region in the promised land. If you were to look at it on a map, you would see it, and you would recognize it. It's in the news even today. It's the coastal region, or modern-day Gaza, or southern Israel. And that's where the Philistia was, or the Philistines. And the Philistines were pressing out of the coastal region more inland. And that caused the people of God, who then occupy that area, to say, hey, whoa, you're supposed to stay over there. This is our land. And so they are now at war with each other over land. And so on one side of a valley is the people of God, the Israelites. On the other side are the Philistines, and they're staring at each other, and there's this valley in between. And as they're in this valley, they're staring at each other, looking at who's going to make the first move. What's going to happen? Who's going to blink first? Who's going to fire the first shot? They didn't have guns, but who's going to fire the first shot or throw the first spear? What is it going to be? Now, we're going to pause that. In Israel, there was a family led by a guy named Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons. And 3 of those sons were old enough to go to war. And 3 of those sons had gone off to war with King Saul and the Israelites, and they were there at the encampment right at the edge of this valley looking at their enemies, right? So Jesse has 3 sons. That's where he went. His youngest son, a little boy named David, was not old enough to go fight. In fact, he's not old to do much of anything. He's got some chores. One of those chores is they've got a few sheep he was in charge of, and he was supposed to make sure they didn't get gobbled up in the wilderness, that they ate and they drank. That was his deal. Well, he calls David and says, hey, here's the deal. I need you to take some food to the front lines where your brother is and just report back. Here's some bread, some cheese, and take some bread and cheese and go drop it off, bring a report back. That was the deal. So David takes his little home-cooked meal, not really cooked, but you know what I'm saying. He takes his homegrown food, and he heads off to the front lines. And when he gets there, he finds, just as he thought, battle lines that are drawn. the Israelites, the people of God, the Philistines on the other side of the valley, and everyone's just staring at each other. Except for there's this really large guy who walks out from the other side once in the morning and once in the evening, and he taunts the people of God. His name is Goliath. He's from a city called Gath. And Goliath of Gath comes out from the Philistine army, and he said, hey, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Let's just save the bloodshed. Send your best warrior to fight me. Whoever wins, wins the war. That's what we're going to do. Whoever wins, that's it. The other side surrenders. Let's just save the sons, save the fathers, save the brothers. Just one guy's got to die, and that's it. And for 40 days, he had been doing this. So David shows up to deliver the bread. He's like, hey, big brothers, here's the bread, here's the cheese. And all of a sudden, Goliath starts yapping his mouth, and David's like, who is that? And so David gets close enough to listen, and he's listening to him. He's like, what is this guy talking about? What is this guy talking about? And this is what 1 Samuel 17, 10 and 11 says. Then the Philistine said, this is Goliath talking, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Dismayed and terrified. Goliath walks out. He says what he's going to say, and their response is dismay and fear, right? Terrified. So David gets there. He is not dismayed and terrified, even when Goliath walks out. Actually, David goes to the men that's standing close to him, and after he kind of hears this, he goes to them and says, hey, does anybody know what the king is going to do? Like, what are the rewards for the guy who goes and shuts up that guy? Anybody know? Whoever volunteers to go and take care of this, do anybody know what the rewards are? And so they start telling him. They're like, oh, well, you get to marry the king's daughter, and you get riches, and this whole thing. And he's like, okay, all right. He's starting to listen to it. In fact, David goes so far in the presence of these warriors. We don't know how old David is. He's young. He's young. I don't know, he's probably like early teenager-ish. This is what David says. And this, now you got to just remember, he's like hanging out with a bunch of like battle-hardened veterans, right? With like swords and spears and shields, right? The people of God have been fighting for a long time. Like there's always issues. And so this was nothing new to them. And so David, like little David, bread boy, is sitting there in the midst of them. He's like, so what do you get? You get to marry the king's daughter? That's awesome. And you get money? That's cool. And then David says this, in front of these guys, he says, he's talking about Goliath. He said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? He went there. He was like, look, he straight went there. He's like, fellas, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he would defy the armies of the living God? Now, I don't know if Goliath had his stuff hanging out. And I don't know if that was, I don't know. He was a giant. You might have seen it from the other side of the valley. I don't know. But he said, look, that's where he went. He was like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Who does he think he is? Now, his brother, his oldest brother, hears David having this conversation, and he is not okay with it. Not okay with it at all. He says this, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. And so his older brother is like, this is all talk. I know this little kid. This is just a bread boy, fellas. It's the bread boy. And by the way, he talks like he's a shepherd. He's got a few sheep in the wilderness our dad asked him to take care of. It ain't even a big deal. He's got a few sheep in the wilderness, which I bet he came down here and hasn't even thought about. That's how irresponsible this bread boy is. And so and in fact, let me just tell you why he's here. He's not here to do anything else other than he wants to be entertained. He wants to watch a battle. Now, I don't know how David would respond to that, because he says this in front of everybody. David's talking about uncircumcised this, that, and the other. And he's like, you little snot-nosed brat. Who do you think you are? David doesn't think anything about it. David goes from asking the men about rewards and calling out the circumcision status of the giant, hearing his brother ridicule him, and then gets an audience with the king and says, hey, I'm going to go fight this guy. Just wanted to bring you into what I think I need to do. I need to go fight this guy. Now Saul at first, King Saul, he's like, oh, you're a little boy, you know, you're a little boy, and he's like a warrior, you know. This is not going to work, you know. And David's trying to convince him. He's like, no, this has nothing to do with who he is and who I am. This has everything to do with who God is and who God sends. So all the things that you're weighing your decision with don't actually matter. Who you send and who you send us against, neither of those things matter. It's who's doing the sending. That's the only thing that matters. And the truth is, you can send me, you can send any of those boys out there. If God's doing the sending, we got no problems. So it doesn't matter that I'm a little boy. In fact, as he's trying to make his case, it's not just a spiritual case. He's like, you know what, I need to be factual. Let me just be super tangible here. And so 1 Samuel 17:34, David picks up. It says, but David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine, he's obsessed with this. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Hold on. Does his dad Jesse not have to sign like a permission slip? You know, it's like, I give my permission for him to go fight in a battle to the death, you know, like with a warrior from the coastal region of Philistia. Like, none of that. He's just like, yeah, God be with you. You got this. You got this, kid, right? Now, I also want to pause back. Listen to what David said. David said, I've been watching my dad's sheep. Every once in a while, this lion or a bear would come and put sheep in his mouth. And I was like, no, you don't. And so I would go and I would hit that lion or that bear and I'd get that sheep out of his mouth. But then he says, and then when it turned on me, he didn't say I went and what I did is I went to the academy and got one of them tree things. And I got up in the tree and I got some camo, some real tree camo. And then I got through a little thing and I shot with a bow from 60 feet away, or I shot it with like I don't know, what's a gun? Like a 320 something? A big old rifle, right? Like I got a rifle. You can tell I'm doing a lot of hunting. But man, boom, I got a scope and I shot that thing. No, he says, when the bear turned on me, I grabbed it by its hair, and that's it. He's like, that's what I'm going to do to the uncircumcised Philistine. You know what I'm saying? But take a knife, I'm going to do the thing. And so Saul says, all right, have at it. David goes out. As he's walking close, Goliath sees him and it's like, he looks at him and David's got a little stick and he's got some little sling and some stones he picked up, put in his pocket or satchel or something. And Goliath comes out and he's like, this is the best the Israelites have to offer? And he makes the comment, he said, am I a dog that you would come and train me with a stick? That's what David's carrying, like the shepherd stick. He's like, you think you're going to get me to do what you want by like sticking me with it? David, we might think like, oh, David's all business. No, David was a smack talker, like a smack talker. He's already been talking about it, you know what I'm saying? Y'all right, I'm not going to go back into it, but he's already been talking about it. And then he looks at Goliath, and this is what he said. He says, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Like, that's pretty good. That's very spiritual. And it's like, okay, this is good. He's letting us know. But he's not done. It gets pretty trashy right here. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'm going to strike you down and cut off your head. Amen. This very day I will give you here we go. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know there's a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. He looks at Goliath and is like, bro, God sent me. I'm about to cut your head off. And then all these birds flying around, they're going to eat the flesh of all your friends. You ready? I can't imagine being a grown man looking at a teenager telling me that. I'm like, you have lost your mind. You have lost your mind. You're going to need more than a stick. And he had one. David reaches into his little satchel and he pulls out a rock. And it begins to twirl his sling. And he lets it go. And it's so powerful. It hits Goliath right in the head. Cracks his skull wide open. He falls to the ground. He walks over to Goliath's body. He pulls out Goliath's own sword. He cuts his head off. He picks his head up. He carries it back to King Saul as the army of Israel chases down the Philistines. This story has become one of the greatest metaphors in our modern culture. We hear this term, this is a real David versus Goliath fight in sports, even in political arenas, in global conflicts. But I'll tell you, we have something we must address over the next 4 weeks that very much fits into this idea of David versus Goliath. And it's our everyday battle with mental health. Mental health is a giant problem. People are aware of it. But so many are simply watching it happen. They don't know what to do. Or they're paralyzed with fear. Let's paint a picture just for a second. The National Institute of Mental Health, the most latest statistics show that 40 million adults in the U.S., just under 20%, experience anxiety disorders each year. 17.3 million adults in the U.S. experienced at least one major depressive episode in the last year. That's 7.1 of the adult population. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, latest statistics, 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among individuals aged 10 to 34 in the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration tell us that 57% of adults with a mental illness receive no treatment. And that nearly 50% of people with mental health disorder will experience a substance use disorder at some point in their lives. And 70% of youth in juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition. And 67% of them receive no treatment. It's a giant. And every morning and every evening, it comes out into our communities and it taunts us. And so often we sit there and listen to the taunting. We have everything we need to do something about it. We're just paralyzed. when we look at one of the largest causes of mental health disorders and struggles in our world, it's not a new thing. We see it even in this story we just read through. I'll read you a passage again that I read to you the first time. You'll see it there. 1 Samuel 17, 10 and 11. Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Verse 11. On hearing the Philistines' word, Saul, that's the king, and all the other Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Dismayed and terrified. Fear. And a fear that then causes a lower view of who we are. I'm dismayed, like I'm distraught, like I don't think, I don't see a path forward. It doesn't make sense. And it's because I don't have what it takes to move forward. I'm just, like when I've thought through who I am and what I'm equipped to do, I don't know what to do. And honestly, I've got nothing I can do. This ultimately leads to inadequacy and helplessness. Fear is an incredible motivator. I mean, fear is one of the greatest tools we have at our disposal. The election, I promise you, the election is going to be won by whoever can scare one side better than the other. That's what will drive people the majority of people to the polls, is because they're scared to death of what might happen if the other side wins. Which is so strange that we wouldn't be driven to vote for something because of what would happen if we won. We just don't want them to win, which is such a strange way to think about anything. It's not a vision of what should be. It's a vision of, I can't let that happen to me. But fear, man, churches use it. Every October, you have things like Tribulation Trail and Judgment Journey, where people try to scare literally the hell out of kids. And they're like, hey, if I scare you so much, maybe you'll follow Jesus. And that's the idea. Because we know, even the church knows, fear is an incredible motivator. And if you are terrified of not having a relationship with Jesus, maybe you'll have a relationship with Jesus. But I'll also tell you this. Fear is part of, or a catalyst for, almost all mental health struggles. Let that sink in. Fear is part of, or a catalyst for, almost all mental health struggles. Why are we in an epidemic of mental health struggles? Is because we have used and leveraged fear to scare everyone to do everything we want them to do. How do we move masses of people? Scare them to death. But even when we're in that place of fear and struggling, it's not that someone else is scaring us. It's that we're afraid now. What are we afraid of? I've got a list. Just a few things, and maybe you can keep track of the things that maybe bring fear to you. Maybe it's that we fear losing control. That we have a worry that our emotions and our thoughts and our actions, if we were to say it out loud, we might lose control of them. Like if we keep it internal, if we keep everything to ourselves, then we've got everything under control, right? And then we've bottled up our emotions, and when it's private, like we let it out a little bit, but in front of people and to someone else, we wouldn't dare allow them to know that we're hurting on the inside, because if we started to say it, we might lose control of our emotions. They might see something in us that's like, hold on, whoa. I was just saying, how was your weekend? I wasn't ready for all this. And so we're afraid of that. Or maybe it's fear of rejection. That we've got anxiety about being judged or abandoned by people that love us because we struggle with something. Or maybe it's fear of failure. That if we keep it to ourselves and if we never get over it, at least we're only disappointing ourselves. But if we were to share this out loud and still struggle for a long time with it, what would that mean about who we are? Maybe it's a fear of stigma, about being labeled long term or misunderstood because of a condition we're struggling with. Maybe it's fear of vulnerability. It'll make me feel or seem weak. Maybe it's a fear of isolation. That once we tell people, they won't know what to do or how to help, and they'll just withdraw. Maybe it's fear of worsening symptoms. That ultimately, if we were to share it, they would just make it worse. Maybe it's a fear of being a burden. That there's guilt or shame that our challenges are placing strains on other people. Maybe it's the fear of the unknown. Just uncertainty about the future and what this can mean. But I tell you, with most people that I've had conversations with, it's some of those. But one of the largest fears I've run into as a pastor is the fear of treatment. There's a fear of therapy. There's a fear of going and talking to someone. A fear of maybe medication or other treatments. And they're worried that it might not work, or there might be side effects that make things worse. They're worried if they have to ask for help, what will that help say about them? I would say, regardless of your fear, as you stand in front of your giant of mental health struggle, I would say that I believe you're a little more prepared to fight the giant than you think. Remember, this is what David said to Saul. He said, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Well, go, and the Lord be with you." Now think about it. He's a teenager, and he was assigned to watch his family's sheep. And it's not even a bunch of them. It's just a little of them. This is what his older brother said. Just a few sheep in the wilderness. And that's what his assignment was. And so no doubt, the first time, I don't know if it doesn't tell us it was a lion or a bear, but the first time he's got some kind of adversity out there, and this lion or bear comes walking up, and all of a sudden, I don't know if he's playing on his Xbox or whatever, and all of a sudden, like the lion's got the sheep in its mouth, and he's like, "Oh, shoot." And he has to put the controller down. He goes over there, and he's like, "What am I going to do?" And so he gets the sheep loose, and then all of a sudden, the lion or bear turns on him, and he's like, "Oh, dang, I just wanted the sheep back." Like, I didn't know we were going to do this. And then he has to take care of that. When he gets back home, zero chance he doesn't walk in and say, "Dad, you're never going to believe what happened today." He's like, "What?" He's like, "I killed a lion." I was like, "What?" And then the next time, it's like, "I killed a bear today because he took one of the sheep you told me to guard." Now, undoubtedly, as a teenager, he's also probably saying, "Dad, any chance we could put the sheep in some places where I'm not fighting lions and bears?" You know? Like, do we have some places? Can we get a fence? You know, like, can we do something? Like, I'm not really interested for a couple sheep to go fighting lions and bears every day. Like, this is not who I'm envisioning I want to be. This is not what I want to chase down in my life. Okay? It might cost me my life. There's so many moments in our lives. Just look into your past real quick. Start flipping through your past. You can quickly identify the lion and bear that you've already fought. Like, you've already fought them. And you're seeing them now. They don't look like a lion, they don't look like a bear. They look like a whole other myriad of things. They look like I got laid off when I shouldn't have, right? Downsizing. They look like someone betrayed me that was a really close friend of mine. They look like he had an affair or she had an affair. They look like fill in the blank, right? You fought lions and bears. That in the moment, you weren't thinking, man, this is so good. I get to flex these skills today. I'm so happy that I have the ability to walk through. That's not what you were thinking. Just like David wasn't thinking that when he's fighting the lion and bear. He's like, what in the world am I doing with my life? However, when you get past it, he's able to look back and say, man, what seemed like hard times was actually just great preparation. What seemed like hard times was actually just great preparation. Now, he didn't understand that when he was going through it, and you didn't understand it when you were going through it. But that's the truth, and this is how I know this is true. You can hear me. You're breathing the air in this room. You have gotten through it. Now, some of you might still be in something, but I'm saying look at the things in your past. You got through those. Now, you might have gotten through it with scars. You might have some trauma to deal with it. You might have something like that. You might have some things that you're going to have to wrestle with the rest of your life. Where every time you walk in a certain area of the wilderness, like, this is where that bear attacked me. Like, yeah, but the truth is, you got through it. Like, it is something that you have now moved through. And so when David talks to Saul, he's like, look, I didn't know it at the time. But God was allowing what I went through to be good preparation for the giant I'm facing now. Which makes sense when we look at it through the lens of a Christian worldview, because Romans 8:28 says this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. In other words, God doesn't cause the bad things in our lives, but he will use the bad things in our lives as opportunities to prepare us for what's next. And that is a moment of hope, where God doesn't say, hey, I certainly could. I certainly could whitewash our entire world and make it just perfect. No spots, no blemishes, nowhere. And I could allow each of you to walk through the most incredible life, just perfection. He could do it, but it would be fake. We would be living in a fake world, manufactured with puppet strings, and that's how we would walk around. Yeah, God could keep us. I think the best way I've ever been able to put it, God could keep us safe in a dog crate, right? When we got a dog, we put it in a crate, safe. Can't run into the road, can't get in trouble, can't eat the neighbor's shoe, whatever. Like, it's safe there. But that dog's not meant to live there his whole life. Like, he's there just for a short period of time. We let it out. But when we let it out, dog can get into trouble. Bad things can happen to it. It's the same thing with us. God could create a world that would be perfectly safe for us. But he knows that's not the kind of life he wants for us or the kind of life we want for ourselves. And so he says, yeah, I could, but I love you too much to do that to you. And so he lets us have a life, a real life, full of real choices. And then he says, but I will make this guarantee with you. When you choose to do something atrocious, or someone chooses to do something in your direction that's atrocious, I promise you, I will help you use that for good, no matter what the circumstance. I'm going to let you out of the cage. I'm going to let you run. I'm going to let you do all these things. And when things happen to you, I can't stop everything because you honestly don't want me to do that to our world. But when those things happen, I give you my word. I will help you leverage it for good every single time. And I wanted to start our mental health series with this message this week because I wanted to set a foundation for the next 4 weeks. That Jesus is an enormous piece of what we should do in the realm of mental health in our community. The Christian worldview changes everything. It changes everything. Now, there are ways for you to approach mental health and mental well-being, mental wellness, all those things. There's ways for you to do that. There's opportunities for you to jump in and be a part. Like, there's ways to do it, and there's programs and steps and all those things. But I'm telling you, the lens that Jesus creates for our world changes how we see and interact with everything. It informs every decision and every bit of input that we receive into our lives. Jesus changes it all. And by far, it's the very best vision to see and look at our world through. I say that, and I wanted to begin this week with that statement. But I will also say this. Mental health is not solved with Jesus. However, Jesus is who I want with me on the battlefield. Explain it. When David went to Saul, and he says, hey, look, how dare he defy the armies of the living God? We're not going to stand for that. Zero chance. No. And I know you're a little nervous. I got bears, lions on my belt. It's fine. The giant, going to be nothing, because remember, it has nothing to do about who you send or who you're sending me against. It has everything to do with who's doing the sending. And God's doing the sending. So you can send me, you can send you can send anybody. You can send the milk guy, you can send the mail guy, you can send the bread boy, you can send whoever you want to. It doesn't matter. If God's doing the sending, this is a done deal. It's a done deal. Now, when David walks out on the battlefield, super spiritual conversation. God is sending me. He's against God. We're going to do this. Super spiritual conversation. Incredibly biblical worldview. Looking at his problem, his giant, through the lens of a biblical worldview. That's what David's doing. When David walks onto the battlefield, though, this is not what he does. He doesn't walk up to Goliath and say, hey, you have offended my God. And I hope you know he's not going to be happy about that. Watch this. Hey, God, that's your cue. Excuse me, God. God, he's pulling a sword. He's about to cut my head off, God. That's not what he did. No. What David did, he had the spiritual conversation and said, doesn't matter who you send, doesn't matter who we're being sent against, only matters who's doing the sending. I'd like to go, because none of y'all are like nose goes, and none of y'all are going. And so I'm going to go. I'm going to do this thing. And so he says, all right, go, and God be with you. And you know what David did? David was like, well, of course. Why else would we be doing this? All right. And then David goes down to the stream, and he takes a sling, and he picks up 5 little stones, and he puts them in his pocket or a satchel, and he's got a shepherd's stick, and he walks out into the battlefield. And then he trash talks the greatest trash talk. By the way, I'm going to cut your head off, and then all of your friends, I'm going to feed them to the wild animals today. Are you ready to do this? And then he takes a couple steps back, and he starts doing his little thing, and he lets that thing go, and it's done. Now, here's the thing. He walked onto the battlefield because God sent him. He walked on the battlefield with God Almighty. But he also used some tools. God was with him. But he took some tools with him too. And for the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about those tools. Don't get it twisted. If somebody in your family, or maybe you're the person in your family that tells someone who's struggling with mental health you just need to pray more, let me tell you something. Thoughts and prayers are not going to get it done. Thoughts and prayers do hardly nothing in our world. Thoughts and prayers are where we begin. It's the spiritual foundation of what we do. And then you know what God says? God says, thanks for letting me know. But if you think thoughts and prayers are just in my direction, let me tell you, the reason you pray to me is so I can inform you what's next. So thank you for letting me know what you're concerned about. This is what I want you to do about it. And what I don't want you to do about it is thoughts and prayers meet tomorrow about the same thing when you could have done something about it already. But it's so much easier on Facebook, the thoughts and prayers. No, God has given us an incredible set of tools to attack problems in our world. And it begins with Jesus. And it continues with Jesus. And Jesus will walk with us every step of the way. But he does not desire us to walk with our hands behind our back and rely on him to do all the doing. No, he does the sending. And he goes with us. But the biblical concept is that we are to be the hands and feet of Jesus. In other words, it's our hands that will get dirty. It's our hands that will get messy. It's our feet that are going to be ruined with the muck that we walk in. And we will do it in the name of Jesus. And that's the way he designed us to be. I want to give you a heads up about what the next 3 weeks are going to look like because it's very practical. So not today, but starting next week, when you walk out these doors and when you arrive, at least for those of you at the 11, we're going to have mental health providers, partners of ours in the community that we have talked with and interviewed and vetted and all those things. They're going to be here on campus for the next 3 weeks. And they're going to offer and be a part of letting people know, raising awareness of services they offer. And they range from specialization with women to marriage and family, the conversations with men to children and adolescents, addiction. It runs the gamut. They're going to be here for the next 3 weeks. They've all made a commitment to be a part of what we're doing in this series the next 3 weeks. They'll have tents out there, and they'll have people that are a part of that organization under those tents for you to make some connections with. So I want you to start thinking, hey, who are some people in my life that need to get connected with the next step with this? And I think you need to start asking God, I need the words to invite them to be a part of this. If they don't want to be a part of anything else, what a Christmas series, whatever that's just coming up, they might not, but you already know, like there's already people in your mind that's like, man, I wish I could convince them to talk with someone. I wish I could convince them just to give someone else a chance to listen and just help provide a next step. We're going to bring the mental health providers as close as I can get to you, right? Here on campus. And then what we're going to do to help solve this barrier that's going to be created immediately, let's pretend for a second that one of you decided, I need to go and talk with whoever one of those things are. And I tell you about them next week, you're like, ooh, I want to go to that tent. But then there's going to be this little voice in your head that says, but you can't go to the tent in front of everyone because then everyone's going to know that you needed to go to the tent. And that's why you haven't done anything already because you don't want anybody to know. I got you. So I'm going to ask every week that every single one of you go to at least one tent, whether you need to or not. And that way, everybody who needs to go to a tent will go to a tent. And it's not going to be a bad thing for you to make a relationship, introduce yourself to someone who's leading one of these organizations in our community. Because the truth is, if we look at the statistics, 20% of the adults in the United States are struggling with mental health. 50% of people that have mental health run towards addiction at some point, at least once in their life. So you might not have a need today, but I promise you, before the year's out, you're going to run into someone. This is what they need. So that's the first practical thing we're going to do. The second practical thing we're going to do, and I'll mention this next week and every week afterwards, is that we believe, and again, trying to lower barriers, eliminate barriers. And so we always prepare every year for this. Sometimes it's like, I think it's a waste of money. Cool. Well, we would invite you to waste our money. We will pay for your first visit to go and meet with one of these organizations. No questions asked, right? So if you're thinking, I don't even want to invest the money, it might cost $75 or $90 or $125. And I don't want to waste that money just to prove to whoever in my life that this isn't worth my time. Okay, fine. So we'll take that off the table. Every single one of the people that'll show up next week, if there's a charge involved in their services, we've already set up the ability for them to bill us directly. All I have to know is that you are going, which we can find an anonymous, or not anonymous, you have to know your name because I have to send them their name and say, hey, send their first bill to me. And that's what they'll do. Every single one of them, they'll be here next week, week after, have already agreed to it. They've already been doing it. We've been sending people to meet with licensed professional Christian counselors for years now. We've been doing a mental health series for years now. I promise you it's worth it. This is the second practical thing we're going to do every single week. The first one, we're going to have them as close as I can get them to you as possible. And we're going to make sure that everybody goes to a tent so that everyone who needs to go to a tent gets to a tent. The second one is financial issue with session 1 is off the table, right? It's going to be taking, if you need the help, it's an easy thing. All you have to do, and we'll get you next steps for how you need to do that next week. It'll probably be like texting a number or texting a word, and we'll take care of the first cost. So there'll be nothing. So the people that you care about in your life, if you think of a better way for us to partner, let me know. Like if you're like, man, what if we could do this? I'd love to hear. I might not be able to pull off in the next 3 weeks, but we're going to do another series like this next fall. We do it every single year in some form or fashion. So we want to be incredibly practical next week. But again, it's not just about the people that you know. It's about you. When we look at the statistics, there's a lot of people sitting in this room that are struggling. And we want to be a part of the solution to help you. That's what we want to do over the next 3 or 4 weeks. We want to acknowledge that there's a giant in your life. And then we want to get a little confidence that just says, does he know who he's messing with? Because the truth is, it doesn't matter who you're up against. And it doesn't even matter who you are and what you've become so far, even if you feel inadequate. Because it's not about who's being sent or who you're being sent to fight. It's about who's doing the sending. God's a part of it. We're going to make the most of the next 4 weeks. And I'm looking forward to progress. And it's my hope that you would begin praying for it.